So skeleton ships were a mechanic that we prototyped a long time ago, probably back in like 2014 or 15, in our Unity prototype of the game, and it was something that was like technically very difficult to realise in the game.
You're right, there were definitely some technical challenges we had to overcome here, and we knew this up front that we'd have to do this, so we went very much into a prototype mode. We needed to address the navigation of skeletons on moving bases.
Yeah, I mean, they'd only been on the islands up until that point, which were always kind of static islands. They never moved or were dynamic in any way.
So now we had to take that technology and get it working on ships which were pitching around in the sea, and of course we had performance considerations to look into too. So performance hit us in two ways. And what we were focused very much on at first was the client perf. So this tends to be the perf on your Xbox or PC. It tends to be affected by things like the visuals which are going on during the battle, and it would reveal itself in low frame rates. As we went on and we addressed those issues and we upscaled our playtests to more players and more ships, we started to see the effects of server performance. Now this was a subtler effect. So basically, rather than your actual local kit worked nice and smooth, but what you'd see would be more latency from the server.
The ships are one of the most expensive things that we have in our game, and we're obviously adding more of them into the fray, so the frame rate naturally dropped. So when we were first running our playtests internally, they were around like 10 frames per second, so we kind of chipped away at all those problems to try and get the frame rate back up.
And it wasn't surprising. I mean, the ships are effectively mini levels floating around in the sea.
And each of them had a wealth of skeletons on board as well, which is obviously a costly thing to have in the game as well.
So one of the very early areas we looked at was basically getting the AI to navigate on a moving ship.
Yeah.
The core system we had only worked with a static navigation mesh. Now the navigation mesh is like a simplified version of the world, which the AI can use to travel around on. They can use this to work out how they get from A to B.
Yeah, so one of the major difficulties with getting the skeletons navigating around the ship was the fact that it was moving, and we saw a lot of kind of strange issues that we'd not encountered on the islands because of that fact. So initially they were kind of all floating like half a foot in the air, and they weren't kind of correctly based onto the ship. And then there was issues where they would kind of navigate around the ship, but they wouldn't orientate to look at you. So they were kind of always like offset to the side, like whilst fighting you.
Basically, we're dealing with a lot of long-standing systems which had always been written to assuming that the world was static.
So when we first started prototyping the AI ships, we kind of did it in two phases. We did kind of like behavioural stuff first, so getting the AI ships tracking beside your ship so that you can board them or fight them and they can fire cannons at you. Then we started working on the ships ramming you, so they could, after a certain amount of time, they could pick a target and kind of turn into them and smash into the side of them. And then finally we started looking at the circling behaviour. So if the player's ship dropped below a certain speed or they dropped the anchor, then the AI ship would kind of track next to them and then start circling them and firing cannons while circling. But shortly after that, we started having to look into obstacle avoidance, which was a prototype in and of itself. So part of the obstacle avoidance, we kind of put these whiskers on the front of the ship, so we'd have like one either side of the front of the ship, and then when the whisker touched like an obstacle, like a player's ship or a rock or an island in the world, it'd try and steer away from that.
So the whisker avoidance worked really well. It works well in this situation in the sense that we've got a very fast-changing environment, lots of ships coming and going, and it works really well in that situation.
So once a bunch of these kind of larger technical issues were out of the way, and we looked at how the makeup of the crew would work, so picking like a form for a ship, like a plant or a shadow skeleton, and then making sure that they spawned all over the ship. And then each skeleton has their own like distinct role. So you had the captain that mans the wheel, skeletons that would dock to the cannons and fire at other ships, and then we'd have dedicated skeletons below decks to repair the ship. And then we even had skeletons that their sole purpose was to come protect the people that were repairing the ship as well.
And those roles give a lot of scope to the player to take different strategies on taking them on. Yeah. Taking out the captain to basically leave the ship unsteered.
Yeah, or boarding and like taking out the guys with the cannons, and then they couldn't fire back at the players. So after we'd run a playtest internally, we'd then do these feedback sessions where we got everybody in a room together and basically took notes on like the pain points of it, like any bugs that they encountered or what they thought to the general balance and difficulty of the game as well.
Yeah, we took the balance up and down quite a few times during that process.
Yeah, there was many things to kind of like change that would drastically affect the balance, and that was quite difficult to not go too far one way and make subtle changes and then having to organise an entire studio playtest again to ratify those changes and make sure they were correct. For example, the cursed cannonballs, when we first put them in, they barely ever fired cursed cannonballs, and this is this big new feature that we're adding to the game, but you never kind of got to see or experience it. So we dialed that right up and then probably went a bit too far, and then kind of like tuned it over time to try and get that frequency of them firing these cursed cannonballs right.
What was great to see with the playtests was, as we went from playtest to playtest, the feedback got more and more positive. We were able to address most of the issues which were coming up.
Yeah, the experience as a whole was there, and it's more just kind of like fine-tuning it. So yeah, really happy with where the battles have ended up, and obviously there's more work to kind of improve them going forward, but we've had some awesome playtests inside Rare, and we've obviously had some tests where they didn't necessarily play out exactly how we thought we would, like when the Megalodon came part of that encounter. That was a shock to us as it was as much to the players, but we've kind of embraced that and tried to make Meg work alongside the AI ships so that those stories can happen forevermore for real players.
For me, it was the epic scale of those battles, going into the area and having two ships suddenly burst out of the sea on either side of you, the water spraying everywhere, all the different ships from the server engaged, cannonballs flying across through the sky.
Yeah, it was very rewarding to kind of see where it landed based on all the kind of technical challenges that we had along the way.
That was my favourite video. Thanks very much for watching. If you'd like to stay up to date with everything Sea of Thieves, and please click the subscribe button and hit that little ship's bell for all those notifications. Cheers.